We're live. We're streaming. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you guys. Thank you all for coming out. So I'm going to sort of take first a moment to introduce myself and kind of tell you who I am, why I'm here, the kind of work that I do. And I guess this will be a somewhat of a different kind of conversation. Really, I started doing these workshops, I guess, longer ago than I care to admit, despite my youthful appearance. I've been doing this work for quite some time, and part of the reason I do the work that I do, I think it will sort of come out as I introduce who I am and stuff, and we'll try to get a sense of, I guess, this audience, and whatever that audience is out there. You guys can't raise your hand when I ask questions, but you're out there. I know you're out there. I hope you're out there. Anyway, so I'm Dr. Adam Aponte. I'm the Assistant Dean for Diversity at the North Shore-LIJ School of Medicine. Anyone heard of us yet? One person, okay, two, good, wonderful. So we're a brand new school. I mean, brand new in the sense that we're only 4 years old. We have our fourth class now, a group of seniors who are about to graduate in May. And I serve as the Assistant Dean for Diversity. I'm a pediatrician. And so I'm going to give you a little background of who I am as we start this discussion. Usually this is a little bit more interactive. I'm not sure how interactive we can be because of the way that we're set up, but certainly hopefully we'll have opportunity for questions. I can take questions from the audience at some point? Okay, good. Before I start, let me just get a sense of at least the people in this room, who you are. So college seniors, raise your hand. Good. Postbacks? Good. Sophomores, juniors, freshmen? Any high school students? College advisors? See, I knew you were in the room. See, I'm not going to forget about you. Good. So we got a mix of different individuals. And that's great, actually. I think that's a wonderful thing to have a mix. And I certainly applaud the high school and freshman students who are here, because the sooner you learn about what we're looking for in terms of medical school. I see somebody got my bag there. Great. You went to our table. She doesn't know I'm talking to you. You have our table. Hold that up. Hold it up for the camera. No, I'm just kidding. It's great that you're sort of doing this work early on. And so, let me tell you about who I am and why I do this work that I do, and what sort of set me on this path. So I'm from New York. Any New Yorkers in the house? No? Okay, that's fine. My parents are from Puerto Rico. Any Boricuas in the house? No, all right, that's fine too. I usually don't find too many outside here in California. When I do this on the East Coast, I find a lot more love, if you will. But that's okay. Anyway, so my parents came from Puerto Rico, I don't know, 60 years ago, like many of our parents do, so immigrant parents do, looking for an opportunity and trying to really improve, the circumstances that they faced when they were young. And I come from a very traditional Latino background in the sense that my father, who unfortunately at the age of 9 was pulled out of school because his father passed away. And for those of you familiar with the Latino background, though, you are the man of the house when your dad leaves. And so at 9 years old, his older brother took him out of school and said, you need to work. You need to help the family. So he had a fourth grade education and really worked all his life until he died about a year and a half ago. My mother was raised as a traditional Latina in the sense that, it wasn't that education was in value, but what was more important and practical at that time, growing up in a pretty impoverished area of Ponce, Puerto Rico. And so she was taught the things that were most important to a woman in the Latino culture, or at least was perceived to be most important. Taking care of the family, raising kids, cooking, cleaning, housewife duties. And so she left school by the time she was 6th grade. So they both came to the United States to try to, United States, I shouldn't say United States, they came from Puerto Rico to New York, because we all know that's part of the United States. Not everybody knows that. Go back to your country, people tell me all the time. It's like, well, my country is the United States, hello? Anyway, I digress. And so they came about to really try to find a better life for us. And we grew up in East Harlem, New York. For those of you who are not familiar with East Harlem, New York, we call it El Barrio. It's like the Latino community in New York City, and particularly in New York and Manhattan. We grew up in that community. I'm one of 7 children. I'm the 6th of 7. I'm the youngest boy in the house. And we grew up in very, very modest means. Quite frankly, we grew up poor. Grew up on public assistance. We grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment. 4 boys in one room, 3 girls in the other room. My parents had a makeshift kind of living room / bedroom. It didn't always feel that way growing up, but that was our circumstances. And from a very young age, I always knew I wanted to be a doctor. My mother says that as soon as I can talk, I used to say I wanted to be a doctor. And I guess at that age, a very young age, I'm not sure what it was. I joke oftentimes maybe it was just because I was seeking attention. I'm one of 7 kids, so you want to get a little attention when you're 7 kids. Even though I got my fair share as being the baby boy, that was kind of cool. But we always had lots of big family gatherings as well. Any of you who know the Latino culture, we celebrate anything. Give us a reason to celebrate. I don't care what it is. We just need any reason to celebrate. We have a lot of big gatherings, and all our tios and titis, uncles and uncles would come over, and inevitably my parents at some point would say, oh, so ask Adam what he wants to be when he grows up. And he say, oh, he wants to be, I say, oh, I want to be a doctor. They say, hey, que bueno, que bueno. That means very good, for those of you who don't speak Spanish. So that was nice attention, but clearly it was more than that, right? And certainly one of the things that I knew from very young was, or I had a sense of, was the love of science. So that's kind of first that started for me. I was that nature kid. I watched all those nature shows. I was always fascinated by the human and sort of all the things that we're able to do, and just I was intrigued by all that stuff. And that sort of really resonated with me very much so when I was young. And then the other couple of things that kind of resonated with me were, I guess, what we call today health disparities. How many of you in the audience are familiar with that term, health disparity? Raise your hand. Good. All of you who want to be doctors should be raising their hand, because one of the things that you need to be doing as future physicians is understanding what are the issues that we're dealing with today in medicine. So when we talk about medicine and improving the health care of this country and achieving health equity, you need to understand that there are these things that we call health disparities. And that's not a term that I knew when I was a young person growing up in East Harlem. I just knew that in East Harlem, the community that I lived in had a different health outcome than a community that was right next to us. And that community that was right next to us is called the Upper East Side. And for those of you who have heard about the Upper East Side, but that's kind of the zip code in the country that has the largest number of millionaires, right? And so these two communities are separated by what we call a double yellow line, 96th Street. And 96th Street runs east and west, right? And on the south side of 96th Street, you have the Upper East Side, a very affluent community. When I was growing up, it was predominantly Caucasian. Now it's a little bit more diverse, but predominantly Caucasian. And again, this is Silicon Valley. These are those Park Avenue apartments that you've heard of, huge, a lot of wealth, right? And it's separated by East Harlem by this double yellow line, such that when you cross the line like this, you literally hop over, you're in East Harlem. The cameraman's going to love me because I'm going to start moving around. He's going to be like, where's this guy going? And so these two communities sit right next to each other. And when you look at the health outcomes of these two communities, it's very striking what you find, right? And so Upper East Side, as I said, affluent community. East Harlem, predominantly Latino community. Going to Harlem, African-American community. Upper East Side, very affluent, wealthy, nice apartments, very good quality of life. East Harlem, poor, poverty, crime, drugs are the constant variables, housing developments, poor housing conditions, and they sit right next to each other. And when you look at what we call the healthcare indices, and you should be familiar with that, healthcare indices are how we look at communities, right? We have healthcare indices as a national level, right? What's the health of the United States when it comes to hypertension, diabetes, cancer, whatever, you name it, diseases. We have healthcare indices. And then we get very granular. We get down to the zip codes. And we look at, say, okay, what's the healthcare in this zip code? And we do that so we can understand what are the afflictions in that community, what kind of services are needed, and try to understand the causes of disease prevalence in one community versus the other. Right? So when you look at these two communities and you look at something like what we call infant mortality rate, I'm a pediatrician, so I got to use pediatric measures. So infant mortality rate is a child dying within the first year of life. Right? So we want that number to be as low as possible, right? You don't want kids dying. All right? And I guess, 50, 75, 100 years ago, children were dying from all sorts of things, mostly from infections, lack of immunization, poor nutrition, safety issues. There were a lot of accidental deaths in children, right? So we've done a great job of decreasing the infant mortality rate. Right? So when you look at New York City as a whole, so that's the 5 boroughs in New York City, we look at Upper East Side, and we look at East Harlem, and we look at infant mortality rate, we see the following. So for New York City, the infant mortality rate is about 5.5. So that means 5.5 children die per 1,000 in New York City. Again, we like that number to be 0, right? But sometimes kids are born with diseases that we just cannot cure. Some congenital conditions that we just cannot correct, despite all our efforts, right? So when we look at Upper East Side and you look at infant mortality rate, it drops down. It's 4.5%. So the Upper East Side is already doing better than all of New York City. So they're already showing better. Now let's hop over. East Harlem. All I did was cross the W line. It's no further than from here to the back of the room, I kid you not, as far as distance, right? And when you look at infant mortality rate, it almost doubles. It's 9. So why is it between these two communities that are sitting right next to each other, that have the same access to hospitals, the same hospitals are there? You have Mount Sinai Hospital, you have Metropolitan Hospital, you have Harlem Hospital, you have Lenox Hill Hospital. All these hospitals surround these two communities. Why is it that these two communities have such a disparate number of deaths for infant mortality rate? And it doesn't stop there. When you look at asthma, pediatric asthma, East Harlem has the highest rates of pediatric asthma in the country in comparison to Upper East Side. Hypertension, diabetes, cancer, breast cancer. Breast cancer affects 1 in 8 women nowadays, right? Caucasian women have a higher incidence of breast cancer, but African American women die more from breast cancer. Why is that? Those are health disparities, right? And that's something that I understood when I would go to the emergency room with my mother and I would serve as the interpreter for her. Because although she spoke English, she preferred speaking Spanish. And none of the physicians spoke her language. And as serving as an interpreter, I knew she wasn't getting the best care possible. Something I understood when I saw the men in our community dying at much younger ages from diseases like liver disease or cancer. Or the people in our community who had diabetes who had much more morbidities associated. So they were more likely to have renal failure, lose a limb, have blindness associated with that diabetes when you compare it to the community. So that was a driving force behind why I became a physician. And the other thing, if I'm keeping it 100, as we say in the hood, for those of you who are familiar with that vernaculum, don't let the suit fool you, I'm just a homeboy in a suit, is society. And society said a Puerto Rican kid from East Harlem is not going to become a physician. Right? That's a message I got throughout my life. You know? And for a lot of reasons, many of us do not. I mean, there were no role models in our communities. There were no doctors in East Harlem who lived next door. There were no Dr. Huxtables, for those of you who are familiar with the Cosbys. Right? So if you say you want to be a doctor in East Harlem, who was that role model? Who's that person you can go talk to, a neighbor, a friend, a family member, to kind of help you with that process? Right? The only individuals in the pharmaceutical industry in my community were not people that you wanted to follow. For those of you who didn't get it out there, those are the drug dealers. And I share that story because, sad but true, when you're looking at these communities and you look at something like drug dealers in communities like that, you can understand why they may have influence in communities like ours, right? Like it, love it, or hate it, I'm not certainly condoning it. I'm not saying this is right. But the reality is that think about growing up in a very poor community, right? I mean, I was the 4th boy. So imagine what my clothes look like in terms of hand-me-downs and hand-me-downs, right? And so now, you know, you got these young cats on the corner, 18, 19, 20 years old. They got a wad of cash. They're driving these nice cars. They got all the bling. They got all the girls around them. And you're like looking for a way out. You're trying to figure out, how am I going to get out of this situation? You can understand, not accept, not condone, but you can understand why some of these young men in particular might gravitate towards that area. Now, fortunately, I did not. I had a lot of friends who did. Most of them are not here today to talk about it. A lot of them are spending a lot of time in college. That's jail, right? Doing a lot of years. So you don't retire from the drug deal, right? You either wind up in a nice green pasture somewhere, cemetery, or you wind up what we call college, in jail. And so those are where my driving forces for me. Those are the things that sort of set me on my path to become a physician and try to make that difference. Went to public schools in New York City and sort of traveled that route and, you know, faced a lot of obstacles, a lot of challenges in my life. And how many of you in this room will be the first doctors in your family? Raise your hand. Okay, so that's me as well. So you think about that when you're trying to achieve that dream and you have no one else to follow, you know, you don't navigate it as well. And so part of the reason I do the work I do is because part of my job is to help shine that light. Because many of my friends who I grew up with were very bright. They were very smart folks, some of them smarter than me. I can say that today. I wouldn't admit that then, but I can say that today. Right? And many of them didn't make it, not because they were not smart enough, because they didn't have the right guidance. They didn't have the right mentorship. Or sometimes they were even misguided. And that's something that happens to many of us. And so that's kind of what set me through. And, you know, challenges galore. Started working when I was 10 years old because I had to help make some money. And it's because, you know, if I wanted to get some nice things, I had to make my own money. And so I did that. Everything was legal. Everything was on the up and up. But despite it, still faced all these challenges I talked about. So I'll share a story that I often share about my 9th grade teacher, and Mr. Ambrose. I remember his name very, very well. If you're out there, Mr. Ambrose, I remember you. Not for a good thing, though. Because Mr. Ambrose said to me when I was in 9th grade, said, so Adam, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I look at Mr. Ambrose and I said, listen, I want to be a doctor. So Mr. Ambrose looks at me, he says, oh, maybe you shouldn't aspire so high. Wow. And I joke, I was like, I'm not sure if I knew what aspire meant. You guys all know what it means though, right? But I knew one thing. I knew Mr. Ambrose was not supporting my dream, right? And I'm all about keeping it real. I keep it 100. When I talk to students and they face challenges, I'll let you know, listen, this is where your strengths are. These are the areas you need to work on. We need to do that. As pre-health advisors, it's something you do, right? You got to highlight to students, listen, this is going great, but listen, if you want to do this, you have to work in these areas. But I would never be a dream killer, right? You can't tell someone, no, you're not going to do something like that. Don't aspire so high, right? Had I listened to Mr. Ambrose, I wouldn't be here today. Right? And that's something that many times, many of us face when we come out of communities that we come out of, because people don't have that faith, that confidence. Now, Mr. Ambrose would have said to me, listen, Adam, if you want to be a doctor, you need to buckle down, you need to stop being the class clown, you need to get, I get that, I get that. That's our job to do that. But to tell someone don't aspire so high, I think is a disservice. And those are some of the challenges that many of us face. So just an anecdote to that story, or a sidebar to that story. Many, many years later, Mr. Ambrose invited me back as one of his star alumni to speak to his students. And of course, he did not remember the story of not telling me to aspire so high. But a friend of mine, who's a celebrity now, Malik Yoba, said, Mr. Ambrose, remember when you told Adam not to aspire so high? I was like, no, I don't remember that. Like, yeah, you did. So those are things that you continue to face. And, I went to college, I went to the college that I could afford, not necessarily the college that I preferred. It all worked out. I'm a strong believer in fate. I think everything happens for a reason. And you make the best of situations, and certainly in college, I made the best of my situations there. Had to do a lot of work to get to where I am in terms of, challenges. So in college, I was working 35, 40 hours a week. And so that's a lot to be working and trying to become, this doctor and taking a pre-med. So of course I had that physics, organic chemistry semester that some of you probably have had. So I share this only because, again, part of what you need to do for those of you who are doing this is learn to overcome obstacles that you may face. Right? And so one of my obstacles, I will profess, is all over the internet anyway. I got a D in physics my first semester. Right? And I share that not because I'm proud of it. And I share that not to encourage you to get a D in physics. So let's get that straight. Don't say that Dr. Aponte said it's okay to get a D in physics. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying stuff happens, right? And so part of what you need to do is learn how to overcome those obstacles. And certainly, I took my second semester physics. I got my B. I was good. I've done a lot of physics since then. Now, physics is a very important course, actually, although I don't do much of it nowadays. So these are challenges that we face, and realizing throughout my life this is what I face. Part of the reason I do the work I do now is because of those challenges. When I was applying to medical school, my pre-med advisor, right? I took my MCAT, right? That four-letter word that you guys don't like nowadays. It's going to get worse next year, 2015. Ooh, I don't envy you. I was going through undergrad. I wasn't a straight A student. I already shared that with you, but I think I did fairly well. I went to my pre-med advisor. Her name was Miss Elaine Moss. I remember her name very well. And I said, Mr. Moss, I'm ready to apply to medical school. And she says to me, what makes you think you can get into medical school? I'm like, what is this? Deja vu? Are you related to Mr. Ambrose? What's this all about? Like, what is going on with you guys? So fortunately, she retired. She didn't have to write my letter of recommendation. Someone else came into my life who was much more supportive. And again, understood, right? Understood what it took for a young man with no role models to navigate this process on his own, wasn't a straight A student, had to work, came from a poor family, did fairly well academically. Actually did some research as well. I squeezed in research. Now, the only reason I squeezed in research is because I got a paid research position because I told you I was working. That was an interesting experience in terms of how I got that research experience. But she understood all those challenges. And she understood, as we talk about today, holistically, reviewing applicant holistically, looking at all their experiences, their attributes, and the metrics, and combining all those things to say, wow, if we take Adam and he doesn't have to work 35, 40 hours a week, and he can focus that 35, 40 hours on his studies, or at least 30, because I want to hang out for a little bit, right? Then he would be that much of a better student. So that person recognized that years ago. This is kind of, again, the reason why I do this work. And then the last thing I'll share with you before I talk about the work I do specifically in diversity is seizing upon opportunities. Is something else that I think is very important for young people to realize, right? So overcoming obstacles, it takes a lot of work. You need to be resilient. You need to challenge yourself. You need to make sacrifices. Because I made a lot of sacrifices. Trust me, when people were going out clubbing, I wasn't hanging out. And that's sort of, that sometimes is a little difficult when you're a young person and you see all your friends hanging out. So I made those sacrifices. So that's clearly something that's important to success. The other one is seizing opportunities. Right? So I'll share one story with you about seizing opportunities that I think it really tells the story. And so when I was, one of the many jobs I had as a young person was I was a New York City cab driver. So you guys know about New York City cab drivers? We're crazy. We are. So I was out there. It was a great hustle because I was able to work 12, 13 hours Friday, Saturday, part of Sunday, make enough money to support myself to school. Right? So that was a good, job. So I used to drive around New York City making money, and I was working. I worked hard. I was out there, like I said, hustling, again, in a very positive way to make enough money. And so one time I was working. It was a Saturday night in New York City, on and popping. New York City is on and popping New York Saturday night. For those of you who have never been there, trust me. So it's a great time to work. Everyone's trying to go out. They're going to different places, dinners, plays, clubs, wherever. So it was a Saturday night. I was going uptown on First Avenue. I was empty. I was looking for a fare. We call you guys fares, right? And so I pulled up to a red light. I'm looking around. Another cab pulls right next to me. He's also empty. And so, as cab drivers, we have this rivalry, but we're cordial to each other when there's nothing going on. So I look at him. He looks at me. We give each other a cordial nod. Everything's good. All of a sudden, a person walks out to the street, and they hail us. So now it's on, right? It's a fare. It's like, okay, who's going to get this fare first? Is it you? Is it going to be me? So we look at each other. I look at him. He looks at me. We rev our engine. Boom, boom, boom. Let's go. It's on, right? And so we have a way of timing the lights. We know exactly when the green light's going to hit. So green light hits. We both hit our gas. Boom, we fly. He got to the fare before me. So I could have got to the fare before him, but I would have had to run her over. That wouldn't have been a good thing. So I pulled up behind him. The woman leans into the cab. She's talking to the cab driver. I don't know what's going on. I'm behind them. And, all of a sudden she becomes very animated. She starts flailing her arms around. And then last thing you know, she closes the door and slams the door, and the cab leaves. She hails me. I pull up, and I get up, and she gets into my cab. I'm not even sure what the discussion was about because, quite frankly, when you hail a cab in New York City, you just get in. If I'm working, I'm working. Either I'm working or I'm not working. And so I'm not sure what the conversation was about, but I found out shortly thereafter what it was about. And so she got into the cab, and just to make a long story short, I usually ask people, what do you think happened here? What do you think, why do you think he didn't take her or whatever? And just to get an idea of people have a sense. But long story short was, this woman happened to be an African-American woman, and she was going to Harlem. And he didn't want to take her to Harlem. He didn't feel it was safe. You've heard all this negative stuff about Harlem, I'm sure. It's not as bad as you heard. Every big city has its ills. So he didn't want to take this black woman into Harlem. To me, she was green. She was money. So you want to go to UC Davis? I'll go to Davis. Let's go. Get in. You paying? Let's go. We're on. I didn't really care where she was going. As a matter of fact, she was going to Harlem. She was going to a certain location where I had some friends. I was like, as a matter of fact, when I drop you off, I'm going to go kick it with my homies for a few minutes, talk to them, get back to work. I had no problem taking her. So she was pretty upset. And she was sharing expletives, which I cannot share right now because I'm on camera. But you can imagine how she was talking. And she reveals to me that she's a doctor at NYU in Bellevue. It's like, what? You're a doctor? So I went in. I just told her my whole life story. I'm a pre-med student at City College. I work on the weekends, blah, blah, blah. I told her everything. By the time we got to Harlem, where we were going, she knew everything except my social security number about me. And, so I just had this conversation with her. And just was talking to her about this whole experience, learning about her experience, Dr. Diana Williamson. So you remember the names of certain people who influence you, either good or bad. So Dr. Williamson says to me, so Adam, give me your email address, and I'm going to email you. That's a lie. There was no email then. It was before email. And so she says, give me your phone number. I'll call you, see what I can do for you. So I'm like, okay, great. She gives me a very nice tip. I'm happy. I really didn't think I was going to hear back from her. She calls me Monday morning. She says, so Adam, I want you to call this lab at NYU, Dr. Leonard Lieb. They have a research position open. I want you to apply. I was like, wow, fantastic, right? Undergrads, right? Research position, that's what we want, right? Absolutely. But not so much, because one thing about research as an undergrad is what? You don't get paid. We never get paid as research students. It's like, you're lucky to be in my presence, in my lab. You're lucky to breathe the same air I'm breathing. I'll let you clean out the rat cages or whatever, or change the gel or whatever, right? So we're just happy to be in the lab as undergrad students. You rarely get paid. So I was kind of happy, and it was nice that she remembered me, but I was like, this is going to be tough because I was already living on my own. I was living on my own at that point. I had my own apartment. I was living with my then girlfriend, now wife. So I married my high school sweetheart. The ladies usually say that. The guys are like, whatever, dude. But the next sentence she says is, by the way, this is a paid research position. I was like, what? I am so there. I went there. I interviewed the next day. I got a job. And for 2 years, I was doing oncology research in the lab at NYU. Right? So you think that helped me get into medical school? I think so, right? Right. And so I share that because opportunity, right? A lot of people say, oh, you were lucky. Like, I don't believe in luck. To me, luck is when preparation meets opportunity. Okay? I was prepared. She got in that cab. She told me she was a doctor. Oh, you're a doctor? Okay. Well, let me tell you about who I am. And so I was prepared to seize upon that opportunity, right? And of course, somebody in the audience will always say, oh, well, Dr. Aponte, you find $1 on the street, then you're lucky. I was like, no, when I'm walking down the street, I'm looking down. And that's how come I found that $1. You're looking up. You weren't prepared. I was prepared, right? So I don't believe in luck. So that's a long story about who I am, and I share that only because those are the elements that drove me to do the work that I do. And I share those stories because many of you, some of you, maybe that's resonated with you. Maybe some of you had similar experiences. Maybe some of you were told you can't do this. And what we're trying to achieve here in terms of the work that I'm trying to do, particularly the work around diversity, is to ensure that every person who has that desire, who has that passion, who has that work ethic, can achieve their dreams. Right? And the only reason they should not achieve is because they don't want to, not because someone tells them not to, not because they're not afforded opportunity. And so the work that I do today, besides being a pediatrician, is to work on diversity. Right? And why is that important to us? And usually I open this up for discussion now, but again, just because of the format, I'll share with you why this is important. And so many people talk about diversity, we talk about race and ethnicity, and that is part of what we talk about with diversity. Right? And so when you look at the medical school workforce, when you look at the health profession, when you look at physicians, you find that we're not as diverse. When I walked into Mount Sinai School of Medicine, when I went to medical school, a school that's located in the hood, they're in East Harlem. They can tout whatever Fifth Avenue address they want. They're in East Harlem. And I walked into that school, and there's only 5 students of color out of a class of 105, yet a school that treats a predominantly Latino and African-American population. I found something wrong with that, right? And I said, you know what? How do we connect with these communities if we don't reflect these communities that we serve? How do we best serve these communities if we don't understand who these communities are because we have individuals who can help us navigate those communities? So that's what sort of started me on this process of doing that. And what I've learned from then, beyond just the race ethnicity issues, that diversity is valuable in everything that we do, right? And so if you think about, any aspect of our lives, the more diverse we are as individuals in terms of either what we're trying to achieve in medicine, we're trying to solve a problem, we're trying to cure diseases, we're trying to improve health, we're trying to advance science, medicine, whatever that is, the more diverse we are as individuals achieving that goal, the better we are going to be at getting to that point. And the reason for that is because each of us, every single person in this room, brings something different to the table. Right? We all have different backgrounds, whether it's race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religious beliefs, socioeconomic, whatever it may be, geographic, you name it. You all have different backgrounds. And you bring that into the solution. And so when I brought a problem to a group as diverse as this group, and we're all working together to try to solve that, each of us can add to that solution. And in healthcare, we're trying to address these issues of health disparities. We're trying to treat a population of individuals that's becoming more and more diverse, right? Look at the census data. There's over 55 million Latinos in this country nowadays. When you look at the census projections for 2040, 2050, there will be no majority population. We will be a very diverse group of individuals. And so if we're going to take care of these individuals from all these different backgrounds, then we need to be reflective of that. And we need to have the tools to be able to take care of these populations. And so as we train together as diverse individuals, each of us gives something to the other person that's training with me. So if you're in my class, and I'm your colleague as a medical student, and we're dealing with a Latino from East Harlem, hey, I got that. Let me tell you guys how we look at healthcare, because we all have a cultural lens that we look for. We got a Muslim patient walks in. Well, here's a Muslim person who's part of my class, and he told me about during Ramadan, patients they can't eat from sun up to sundown. I wouldn't have known that otherwise. That's an important tool for me to have with a patient who's coming to my emergency room who I now have to admit and I need to have on oral medications 3 times a day, but now they have some religious beliefs. The Orthodox Jewish patient who walked in and I went to shake the woman's hand and she pulled back because she wouldn't want to shake my hand. Why? I thought it was a racial issue. I was like, oh, really? It had nothing to do with that. It has to do with religious beliefs, cultural beliefs. And so we need to be able to connect with our patients if we're going to improve their health. And the way that we do that is by being as diverse as possible so that we can teach each other. And again, that helps us to really advance science. There's a gentleman out of University of Michigan named Scott Page. Scott wrote a book called The Difference. It's a long title. But he talks about the power of diversity and how in every situation, the more diverse we are, the more likely we are to achieve and be successful at whatever we do. Right? And so, you know, he's a mathematician, I believe, his background, and he really just talks about how that is in every environment. Right? Think about how many of you have financial advisors? Nobody's going to raise their hand. Don't raise your hand. Don't bother. Right? But one day, those of you who don't will. Those of you who do know what I'm about to say. First thing they tell you to do is what? Diversify your portfolio. Right? Why is that? You take all your money, you put it into Home Depot tanks, boom, you're broke. Right? They say put some money in stocks, put some money in bonds, CD accounts, savings account. Keep a little under your mattress. We always keep a little money in the mattress. You guys didn't do that? My parents did that. They didn't think we knew where the money was. It's under the mattress. We know. They didn't trust the banks. So you diversify that because, you know, if you take a hit in one area, you're not losing everything, right? And you're more likely to get better, you know, sort of return on investment from that, right? It's no different if I were to, you know, talk about this room here. If we were to divide this room into 2 sides, Team A over here, Team B over here. Audience, you could be part of either team. You decide, right? And we say to this team, Team A, I'm going to make you, for the sake of this discussion, a homogeneous group of individuals. You all came from the same walks of life, right? Same racial, ethnic background. You grew up in the same suburban community, same, socioeconomic status. You went to the same high schools. You dated each other's brothers and sisters in high school. You went to the prom together. You went to one of the best schools in the country. Name it. I don't care what school. You want to go to Harvard? I'll send you to Harvard. Right? A very well-educated group of individuals. I give you a problem. You going to solve that problem, Team A? Yes? No? Maybe? Of course you are. You're going to solve a problem. You guys are a bright group of individuals. You're going to solve that problem. You're going to come up with a couple of solutions. Team B, you're a totally different group of individuals. You're a heterogeneous group of individuals. You all come from different walks of life, socioeconomic status, geographic, religious beliefs, sexual orientation. You went to all different high schools. You didn't know each other's brothers and sisters in high school. You went to some of the top schools in the country. You name them, City College of New York. That's my college. Wherever, Johns Hopkins, Yale, wherever. You went to some of the best schools in the country. I give you the same problem as I gave Team A. Who's going to come up with a better solution, Team A or Team B? B. Team A, you're going to take that? Team B says they're going to come up with a better solution. What do you guys think? You agree? Team A's like, we can't win. Well, you know what? Maybe Team A, you can argue, though, may come up with some good solutions. But I would dare say most times Team B is going to come up with better solutions. Now, Team A may have better group dynamics because they know each other so well they can finish each other's sentences. But once Team B starts working well together, they're going to come up with better solutions because not only are the solutions, they all have a different perspective. They all have a different box to think outside of. Right? And when you add that into sort of, you know, trying to solve problems, that's how you get to the better solutions. And more importantly, the application of that solution is going to be broader, right? Because it's not good enough just to come up with a solution to a problem. You've got to be able to apply broadly, unless it's a very narrowly focused problem, right? If I'm trying to figure out how to get this bottle from here to here, that's very narrowly focused. Most of the times in science, we're not dealing with such a narrow focus, right? We're dealing with a very broad perspective. And if you think about how we did research in this country for many, many years, right? We took Caucasian males. We studied them, hypertension in Caucasian males. We came up with a solution. Here's a pill that reduces hypertension in Caucasian males, and now I give it to a Nigerian woman. Does that make sense? I don't think so, right? Intuitively, it doesn't make sense. So it's not good enough just to come up with a solution. and be smart to come to a solution, you have to be able to apply broadly. And so part of the work that I do is help people understand why is it important for all of us, right, to have as diverse a healthcare environment. If we want to address health disparities, if we want to improve the health of our community, if we want to achieve health equity, I mean, we are the nation that pays the most per capita in terms of healthcare, but yet we don't have the best outcomes. How are we going to achieve that? Well, part of the way, and I'm just saying this is part of the way, it's not the only way. Part of the way is for us to be as diverse as possible. And so when we look at applicants nowadays in medical school, we look at all these things. We look at what we talk about holistic review. You got to be smart to be a doctor, right? You're not going to go to medical school with a 2.0 and a 15 MCAT. It's not going to happen, okay? So you have to have some academic acumen to be successful. But we also want individuals who have diverse backgrounds, who can help other students, particularly in schools that now are doing much more group learning environments. So we're moving away from didactic sessions and being lectured to. In our school, this would be the longest lecture you would ever get in medical school. And you guys will probably start throwing things at me because our students can't even tolerate lectures anymore, right? It's all group learning. It's everyone teaching each other. And when you have a group of individuals who are diverse and you have a case that you're presenting and you're asking them to solve that case, each person brings something into that mix. And it enhances each of us. So diversity is important for every single one of us. And again, we broaden that definition beyond just race and ethnicity. So that's the work that I do. And it's very important that we understand that. And the other part is serving as that role model, being that light for students who have challenged backgrounds like I had. Because again, had I listened to some individuals, I wouldn't be here today. And it's important that we work with young people and show them that you can do this work. We can't do it for you. You got to have passion. One of the things I talked about on my panel today is passion is important. You have to have the desire. This is my dream. This was my dream, right? This wasn't my abuelo's dream in his deathbed. Oh, become a doctor, make the family proud, right? No, that doesn't work. You can't. That can't be there, right? I can't. You can't be doing this for the money. If any of you guys are doing this for the money, leave the room now, because you shouldn't be going into medicine for the money. Now, having said that, it's nice to know that when you make, and you work and you sacrifice and you become a physician, you make a good living, right? So I'm no longer a Puerto Rican. I do well. My kids have everything that they want. No, everything that they need, not everything they want, because they want too damn much. But it's nice to have that reward at the end of it, but that's not why I did it, right? And so those are elements that are critical beyond anything else. And when you have those two elements and you're willing to sacrifice and work hard, you can achieve this dream. And so that's part of the work that I do, to really shine that light to help people understand that. And you got to be realistic, and we are realistic about it. And we also understand the importance of this work, right? In terms of advancing science, improving the health equity of everyone. Everyone deserves great health care. And we have to ensure that we're doing the best that we can. And I think through diversity and inclusion. So you heard that part of my title was diversity and inclusion. And I think we talk a lot about diversity, but diversity is one element, right? But to leverage diversity, to get the most out of diversity, you need to create an environment of inclusion. And so the analogy I often use with diversity and inclusion is diversity is inviting me to the party. Inclusion is inviting me to dance, right? It's not good enough just to get invited to a party. So you're at the party, you're getting a drink on, you want to get a little dancing, but no one's asking you to dance. You're in the corner, you're isolated, right? Think about yourselves, right? If you get into a place, a medical school, a research lab, a company, wherever it is. So they try and focus on diversity, so they recruited you in, but now you're isolated. You don't feel included. No one's making you part of that party, if you will, and asking you to dance. Right? So we need to create environments of inclusion where everyone is looked at in terms of their attributes, what they can bring to it. They're trusted. They're being recognized for whatever. They're being rewarded equally as everyone else. When I went to medical school, that was a big thing for us. So I went to medical school. Everyone's talking about playing golf. I didn't play golf in the hood. We played handball. We had a ball. We had a wall. That's all we could afford. Sometimes we played stoop ball, right? That was it. So, and I use that example because you think about it, think about you're on rounds, right? And all these physicians are talking about, oh, I'm playing golf and I'm teeing up at this time and my handicap is this. And you're like, okay, what do I contribute to this conversation, right? I feel isolated. Now, does it mean you can't talk about golf? Yeah, it means you can talk about golf, but how do you bring me into that conversation? How do you make me feel included? So Adam, you ever play golf? No? Oh, listen, we should take you out one day. It's a great sport. It's a very frustrating sport, but listen, we have a great time, and we do this and we do that. We love to get you involved in that. What did you do in your neighborhood when you grew up? So that's creating that environment of inclusion. So if you want to leverage the benefit that diversity brings, that's an equal component to it. And oftentimes people fall short in that area. And that's kind of the work that many of us who we call diversity officers are doing. And that's a very valuable aspect of medicine today. So I don't know how much time we have. I know I've been talking quite a bit. I'm not sure we have opportunities to ask any questions. Again, this is just kind of part of the work that we do. I think it's a very important part, again, of us helping achieve equity. What does that have to do with you getting into medical school? I don't know. No, that's not true. But actually, it does have a lot to do with it because each of you brings something different to the table. And it's important that when you're applying to medical school, beyond your metrics, that you highlight what is it you can contribute to our school. And what is your understanding of these issues and how they may impact the communities that we serve. So that's an important aspect of your application as well. So I just want to share that. And if we do have time for questions or comments or concerns or criticisms, I accept them all. We can open the floor if anybody has any questions. Nobody? Anybody out there? Yes, young man, what's your name?
I'm Nathan.
Nathan?
Do you think things are changing at medical schools around the country, kind of using this inclusion and diversity model in a positive way?
So I'm going to repeat the question just in case, because I don't think they hear it over her. So the question was, Nathan asked, do you think things are changing as far as diversity and inclusion at medical school? So the answer is yes. Do I think we are where we need to be? The answer would be no. There's a lot of work that needs to be done still in that regard. So I think folks are understanding that. I think that we're doing a better job of helping people understand why this is important. Because, quite frankly, if you come across in terms of these issues and it's just like, oh, you got to be diverse, 400 years of oppression, fight the power, that kind of stuff. People don't understand that. They don't get it. Even if that's something that really resonates with you because you're a person that came from a similar background, you have to help people understand why this is important. And so what I've learned, the culture that I've learned of medicine, right, because medicine has its own culture, is how do I help my colleague understand these issues? And each of my colleagues may be at a different place in their understanding. And so this is a slow process, but it's a process that's progressing. And it's a process that's getting a lot of national attention and recognition in terms of the value that's going to come at the end of this. And I think before, many years ago, we didn't do a good job of helping people understand the value of this process. And I think we're doing a better job of doing that. So thank you for that question. Any other questions? Yes.
So pretty much
What's your
it
name?
sounds, Carl.
Carl?
Yes. It pretty much, just, what I'm hearing is, it pretty much just sounds like, just providing like inclusion to the group that's already there, as opposed to, like, say, bringing more people into the group. What I mean by that is, getting more people into medical school in a sense. But it just sounds like the people that's already there, just how we get along with each other instead of bringing more people to
Well, no, not at all, Carl. So let me just repeat that again for the audience. But so Carl was saying what his impression is that what we're trying to do is make it better for the people who are already there versus bringing more people to the camp. That's a summary of your question. Is that correct? And that's not the case. Absolutely not. Right? So when I talk about those numbers that I talk about, that's part of the work that we do. We're trying to make this more open to more people. We want to bring more people to the table, right? But the way that we keep them there, retain them, develop them, help them to be the best that they can be is by creating the environment of inclusion. You got to work on both of them, right? So we're definitely trying to open more doors. We're trying to, shed light on more people's paths so they can achieve this dream of theirs. And when they're there, we want to maximize and leverage that to the best that we can by creating environments of inclusion. So that's what we're doing. We're working on both ends of this, and we're working on it from high school all the way up. And listen, let's keep it real. Some people don't get it. Some people don't understand it, and they're never going to understand it. I do grand rounds out in Long Island, New York, in the health system out there, and there's some physicians who have been out there for many, many years, and are very fixed in the way that they think about things. And they'll come up to me, oh, Adam, what's this diversity stuff all about? Why are we talking about diversity? I treat all my patients the same. I said, well, that's the problem. You can't treat everybody the same, right? And so people like that sometimes won't change. So we look forward to their retirement. They will retire one day. You, Carl, you'll replace them. And so, but we, in terms of the process, it is a slow process. And what we've learned is to, in terms of our strategies, how do we bring people to sort of speak? It shouldn't just be Adam Aponte talking about this, right? So when my dean recruited me as Assistant Dean for Diversity and Inclusion, I say, I will accept that position, but I'm not the only person that's going to be talking about diversity in this school. I will help to drive the process. I will help to inform the process. I will be the content expert. But you got to talk about it. You got to talk about it. This dean has to talk about it. Everyone's got to be talking about this and embrace this in order for us to really advance. Because if it's just me talking about it, then it's like, all right, it's him again. There he goes again, that kind of thing. And that's the stuff that we know. And so my dean gets it. He talks about it. He just in a very powerful, we've done very well. For a school that's only 4 years old, we've actually done fairly well in terms of diversity. But the dean sends a message this year. We did well, but we need to work harder. We need to work harder at this effort because this is a challenge for us. And when he says that, and it's not Adam Aponte saying it, that resonates throughout the room. So that's an important aspect of what we do. So that's part of our job as diversity officers is to help give the information to those who really are in charge, to help them understand this. And when they talk about this issue, then more people are going to listen than just me talking about it. Any other questions? Yeah.
I know you stated
Your name?
Notori.
Notori?
Yes. You stated earlier that you got a D your first time in physics.
Yes.
And a lot of
Thank you for
students,
reminding me.
a lot of students in that position would like either quit or
Absolutely.
give up. So
Absolutely.
what was your mindset when you were, after you received that grade, and how would you like give someone else like
Great.
in that same position?
So
What would
Notori
you
wants
do?
to
How would
remind
you
the
encourage
audience that,
someone else?
yeah, that I got a D in physics, and she said, many people who get that would quit. They would fold their cards. And that's the reason that I share that, because that's what many people would do. And many people will actually tell you, it's a wrap, right? You ain't going nowhere from there, right? And so if you want to do something, then you just keep driving at it until you get it. You don't quit, right? And so I wasn't going to quit. If I had to take physics 4 more times just to get what I need to get there, that's what I was going to do, right? And so there's nothing that was going to stop me from getting to where I wanted to go. And so, and I know that's hard because, again, you get a lot of these people who put stuff in your ear. You hear all this misinformation. That's why I do a lot of these workshops, because you do get a lot of misinformation. You do hear that if you get a D in one course, then you can't go into medical school. Well, that's nonsense. We don't encourage that. Our pre-health advisor can confirm with that, right? We don't encourage it, but you can recover from a D.
It's all about them.
Absolutely. You got to put the work in. Went to medical school, got another D, an MD. So that D in physics did not stop me from getting to where I wanted to be, right? So I'm not saying it's easy, but if this is what you want to do, when I interview students for medical school, right, and I don't do too much interviewing, I do a lot more screening now. I talk about passion, I talk about desire. If this is what you want more than anything else, then you put your sight on that. And people ask me, Dr. Aponte, what's plan B? Plan B is make plan A work. That's plan B, right? And so I set my sight on that. And that's what I was going to do. And I was going to do everything I can until I exhausted every possibility to get to medical school. And when you go to interview, and we talked about this a little bit on the panel, we ask you a lot of different questions. Most of them there's no right or wrong answer to. It's just how you think on your feet. Can you respond to certain things? Well, you like the color blue, I like the color yellow. I really don't care. Can you defend your color blue? As long as you can defend it, that's what I want to hear more than anything else, right? There's only one question I ask students that has a right or wrong answer. And that's this: if you didn't get into medical school, what happened? What are you going to do if you don't get in this year? And what's the answer? Absolutely. The answer is, I am going to apply again. I'm going to look at my application. I'm going to reflect on where my areas that I need to work on. I'm going to speak to people. I'm going to work on those areas. And Dr. Aponte, I will be a doctor one day, and I will be applying. So look forward to seeing my application again if I don't get in. And if you have that attitude, that's how you be successful. If you can't see it, you can't achieve it, right? And if you can't see yourself as a doctor, how do I see you as a doctor? You got to convince me that you want to be a doctor more than anything else. And everybody who's successful in this world, I don't care who it is, they've had that same attitude, that this is what they're going to achieve. They're going to be successful, they're going to work at it, and they're not going to quit until they get to where they want to be. And that passion, that dedication is the big driving force of success. in any field. So any of you who want to be pharmacists, PAs, whatever it may be, maybe not all of you want to be doctors, that's how you get to the success. All right, we got to wrap. I don't know if we have time for one more question, comment? No? No? Okay. Well, listen, I want to thank you guys for your time and attention. It's been a pleasure. And in closing, dream big. It's free.